Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegrand, G-R-A-N, group at edinarealty.com or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners. On this episode, David and Hoges recap all the happenings of Twins Spring Training 2025, including the first cuts of the season. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me today, special guest Andrew Hoges Hoganson. Dan Thompson lives out west in Washington. And Hoges, I don't know much about Washington, but what I do know is that it is a basketball state. So Dan has been writing furiously for his real grown-up job as a sports writer about all of the tournaments and the high school games going down. And he said, well, we really just need to get Hoges on the show because I just can't do it right now. So thanks so much for filling in.
Yeah, no problem. I think one thing we need to talk about real quick, though, as it pertains to the podcast is what time zone we are going to start using. And I feel like this is really relevant right now with daylight savings time being in effect, because every time we try to plan out when we're going to do the episode, we're always saying your time, my time, because Dan's out on the Pacific time zone, and it is driving me absolutely nuts. It's driving me so crazy that when you and I were planning what time we were going to record today, I didn't know if you were speaking in Pacific time or Central time, and I wanted to say your time, but that's our time. So I've come up with a new plan, and this is basically an on-air production meeting. From now on, we only refer to podcast time in Mountain time. That way, we each have to adjust by 1 hour, but we all three have to adjust, and then we'll be good.
Out of all of the options, Hoges, that's the worst possible one.
Well, it's either Eastern or Mountain. We can't do Central or Pacific because we all have to change.
No, we just are Central.
Oh,
and then
good.
Dan
Majority rules.
adapt.
I like that. That's very democratic of you.
I just love the way you decided to solve this was to make it worse for everybody.
Yes, just make everyone mad.
Just sort of shows Hoges' mentality when it comes to problem solving.
Isn't that how this podcast is supposed to be, though? I mean, if one of us isn't mad, it's boring. So
Hoges is in a room with two people. And there's two pieces of pizza left, and there's those three guys. And Hoges says, "Let's just throw it all away." That seems to be the best option. Okay, well,
it's
folks,
my parenting strategy too.
You get nothing. Great. Now we need a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory sounder, but you lose. You get nothing. Anyway, folks, thanks so much for listening. If you're a longtime listener, thanks for returning. If you're new to the show, our usual format, we do an episode after each series in the Twins season. We have segments we go through. These spring training shows are a little bit more informal. We just sort of go through any updates, injury or roster or otherwise, talk through some of the things that are happening around the league. Folks, if you do want to support us, we don't put anything behind a paywall or anything like that. We do have a Patreon. You can find the link in the description. We'd love to add a couple more folks. You can sponsor us for as little as $1 a month. Again, we produce a ton of episodes throughout the season. We'd love your support if you believe that we've earned it. But with that, Hoges, let's jump right in to the injury updates, and I'm going to start with the good, and then we'll move to the bad. Okay?
How are the injury updates good? Like, it's still an injury.
Not necessarily. If you're recovering from an injury, that can be
but then
injury
it's lack
update.
Of injury.
Well, no, because you're still coming back from. You are just every minute just pushing back on every.
I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go today, David.
All right, so the first two good notes here: Brock Stewart and Joe Ryan have both now pitched in spring training, and they both looked healthy. And they look like they're going to be ready for opening day, which is a big boon for the bullpen. The flip side of that, however, it's a bit unclear what's happening with Justin Topa. If you don't know who Justin Topa is, we got him on our team last season, and he was going to be a great addition to the bullpen, and he pitched like 3 innings for us at the end of the season after it didn't matter anymore because he was injured. Now he's got some right shoulder tightness to be evaluated. To me, it seems like he's unlikely to make the squad to start the season. Zebby Matthews, I guess this one's okay, is he slipped and he hurt his hip making a play on a grounder, but he seems fine. He threw a bullpen. He's fine.
Yeah, and it sounds like when they took him out, it was just for precautionary reasons, which to me, I don't know. I guess I like that in spring training, but it always bugs me a little bit. If a pitcher has to move, I feel like they take him out for precautionary reasons right afterwards. And so we all freak out because we've been burned so many times before. But yeah, it does sound like Zebby's going to be okay.
And then Matt Cantorino, a guy who is obviously close to my heart as he is a board gaming guy. I don't even know
how to describe this, but the Twins' social media had like a whole thing asking them, I can't even remember what it was. And the second Cantorino's face showed up, I'm like, that's a board game guy. And I cannot tell you why or what specifically it was about it, but it was my immediate first thought was like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
For me, you can usually spot them because they're chubby guys in graphic tees are normally the giveaway.
That's not him. He is a professional athlete.
See, so yeah, it's surprising that you can make that leap, Hogs. But he's been diagnosed with a right shoulder strain after an MRI. No timetable for his return as of this point. And then Wally Jenkins, Walker Jenkins, he's been out for about a week now with a mild ankle sprain. Dan, it's the one note he added to the podcast in his absence. He says, I blame Correa. I feel like we're just going through this list really fast, but I think it's important that people know.
There's not much to it.
No. Emmanuel Rodriguez, the Twins' number 2 prospect behind Wally Jenkins, he suffers a left ankle sprain. Again, we blame Correa, but he has now taken batting practice, and he seems to be getting better also. The only thing that's sort of funny about this is that the Twins' breakout roster was released, and you had to look at it like, huh? Because all of the top guys are out with injury. So outside of Keishel, he's really the only guy on that who really stands out.
Yeah, and knock on wood, most of these seem very, very minor right now. So I don't think it's anything to be concerned about. But like we already talked about, as Minnesota sports fans, anything minor can turn into something major. Like we've seen it with Kirill Kaprizov and Jonas Brodin and Joel Eriksson Ek the whole last week. So we don't even need to dive into that. But yeah, spring training is almost like the scariest time of year for me. Not like the most exciting time of year because you just don't know what you're going to read. And we'll get to it later. But all these other pitchers in Major League Baseball that you just see like, oh, he exited with a right elbow pain, and you're like, oh, he's fine. And then a couple weeks later, it's like Tommy John, and you're like, what? And so it's always that concern, man.
Baseball can be a fickle mistress there, Hogs, keeping the body in check. Now, since it seems like Topa's not going to be able to go for opening day, it seems that Castellano may have a good opportunity to make this roster. Again, Castellano is the guy who we claimed in the Rule 5 draft from the Phillies. Doesn't have a lot of experience in professional baseball, but he has sort of flown up the ranks, and he has a good chance to make the team. I don't really know, Hogs. This bullpen, the top end is supposed to be the best in baseball, is what I understand. That's what every article and every Twitter feed that I read says. But the middle part of the bullpen it seems a little bit suspect.
Are you putting Stewart in that top part when you're talking about him, or are you just going with Duran and Jax?
No, I'm putting Stewart up there.
Okay, good. Not? Yeah, because I would for sure. I was just curious because I think he has the potential to be great this year. Again, he was at the beginning of last year. But yeah, you're right. Like that bottom and middle looks a little bit iffy. I think we're going to have some guys chewing up some innings, but we have 3 or 4 guys that you could argue could be a closer somewhere else. It does put us in a unique situation, though, where maybe we can give a flyer to a younger guy and see how they go and put him in more advantageous situations.
Yeah, I'm curious how Tonkin and Sands and Coulomb, I'm wondering how those guys fit in this picture here. Like Coulomb, obviously, as a lefty, he'll play a pretty important role, I would guess. Sands, everybody talks about the great season he had last season. Sure.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard for me to forget the seasons before. But you don't have Varland on here, and I think Varland could be great, and especially if he's throwing 98. So I'm excited about that.
I hope so, Hogs. I hope that's the case, but we'll see. He got rocked a couple of times. We've seen Louis struggle a little bit here. Minnesota guy, obviously, so we'd love to see him succeed. We got to love our Minnesota guys. We still have Louis Varland and Matt Wallner on the roster. The big news here on the roster, though, the Twins made their first cuts of the spring. Some of these folks, I think, were sent down because of the injuries that they've sustained. But again, no real big surprises here. The biggest name is Emmanuel Rodriguez, the number 2 prospect. And, he may make an impact this season. But right now, Hogs, if the outfield, if those guys take a step like Larnach and Wallner and Buxton stays healthy, Emmanuel Rodriguez might not get a shot. Well, I guess I say I hope he doesn't get a shot almost. I hope that the other guys play so well and that Harrison Bader fills in so nicely when Buxton can't go that there's no reason to see Rodriguez in the majors this season. But if he does come up, I'll be excited about it. Don't get me wrong. I'm just sort of hopeful that the guys who are playing the corners, Larnach and Wallner, are gonna perform this year.
Well, that's the weirdly unique thing that we have this year, right? Because we actually have some depth. So when we're talking about some of these young guys, before we've kind of had the I don't know, I guess the outlook that when they have to make it up to the majors and they have to produce. And I don't feel like we're in that situation this year. I feel like if those guys aren't making it up to the majors, it means we're having a really good year, because the guys that I'm worried about are the sophomore slump guys from last year that are locks to make the roster, but that I'm worried about them having such a down year in 2024.
Yeah, we'll see who these locks on the roster are here in a moment here, Hogs. But the rest of the cuts here, Matt Cantorino, Travis Adams, Marco Raya, Corey Lewis, Randy Dobnik, Erasmo Ramirez, Alex Izola, Junio Severino, and then Diego Cartaya. He's the guy we picked up from the Dodgers, who we can still hold out hopes, Hogs, but it looks like Christian Vasquez is going to be on this roster.
You messed with me because I was just glancing at the spreadsheet earlier today, and I saw that when you put like Vasquez traded to the Dodgers for catcher Diego Cartaya, but it's the pitcher, and I freaked out, and I'm like, what did I miss? Have I been just caught up in NFL free agency today that I didn't see that Vasquez was traded? And then I read it a little closer, and I'm like, oh, never mind.
If you've listened to the show, you know that Hogs is a Packer fan, so I'm curious, do you want Aaron Rodgers to return to the NFC North for the Vikings?
So bad. Like, more than anything on earth. So here, allow me a little bit of a diversion here. When Brett Favre came back to the Minnesota Vikings, that was one of the worst, like, sporting moments of my life. Like, I absolutely hated it because he was my number one athlete all growing up. I was born in 1989. Favre was the quarterback in 1992, and it basically since then. So it was amazing. When he went to the Vikings, that was heartbreaking. I was all messed up that entire year, just absolutely miserable. But Aaron Rodgers, I do not particularly like as a person. He is extremely grating, and I know that Vikings fans hate him with everything in them. You guys hated Favre, but not as much as you hate Rodgers. So for him to come to the Vikings, and then if you were to be good, would be so funny to me, because I know so many people who would just be miserable watching them, and they wouldn't know what to root for. I think the Vikings legitimately, I would root for them. I would still root for the Packers way over them, but I think I would root for them to do well, just to see how difficult it was for you guys to handle your most hated athlete being your quarterback, and especially if he does good.
The psychological
it's
thinking,
some leaps.
Hogs, that you have gone through this episode already is just shocking to me.
So Jordan Love in 2035 then? Is that what it would be after he has a 2-year stint with the Jets?
Well, I just don't fully understand it. So just so I understand your take, you would like Aaron Rodgers to come to the Vikings. You would like him to do well for the Vikings just so the Vikings fans would be sad because Aaron Rodgers was the one who was performing
I have
well.
friends who are diehard Vikings fans who have said that they will cease to be a Vikings fan if Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback.
Okay,
I believe him. I believe him.
People
but
say
that's the
all
thing.
sorts of
Well,
stuff,
so that's what we
Hogs.
talked about. I was like, I have a hard time believing that that would happen if you're 8-0 and Rodgers is winning the MVP race and you're doing great.
Yeah,
and they're like,
people
well, yeah,
say
that's
things
a good
all the
point.
time.
You know what they say? Fool me once, strike one.
That's what this is
But
doing it
fool me
again,
twice,
though.
strike three.
You're going to play the Saints in the NFC Championship game, and
The Saints aren't going to make the NFC Championship game, Hogs. Let's start there. That's
Well, who
the
do
first
you want?
prediction.
Like, honestly, who do you want, though? Do you want it to just be JJ on an island? Because Daniel Jones is gone now.
Oh, no. Like that was...
But you're a good football team. It's not like where you were last year where you're like, yeah, that's fine. I don't care if we stink for a year. Now you actually have some expectation.
Okay, so first of all, we're a baseball podcast. Let's start there. But apparently we've
already
dove
talked about
hard
the Wild for a little
into
bit.
the Vikings. So I guess we might as well lean into it here. I guess this is what I'll say. I think we just roll with JJ and we see what happens. I don't know. I wasn't that sad that Darnold walked away and headed to the Seahawks. I don't know who else is out there. I guess I'd rather have JJ take his
Russell
shot than
Wilson.
Daniel Jones.
I mean,
does he come with a package deal? Like, are there other players who have to come with him? Because he doesn't do every snap anymore, Hogs.
I'm not a Viking fan, obviously, but I tend to agree with you. Like, I don't know if it's worth getting another veteran in there. Just see what you have with JJ. Don't overthink what happened last year. And I wouldn't be that sad that Darnold left either. You're going to really pay a guy $30 million a year who did play great for a while, but those last 2 games, that was rough. I mean, it was great, but it was rough.
It was not good. Okay, if we could circle back, Hogs. Wow, what a tangent we've gone on here. But anyway, one quick correction from last episode. We talked for a good chunk of time, Hogs, about Thad Levine, and we were actually talking about Derek Falvey. And I think it's just because Levine is easier to say. Falvey, the LV combo is just a tricky name.
I would like to point out, when you say we, you're using the communal we. You and Dan talked about Falvey as if he were, or Levine as if he were Falvey.
You just did it. Oh,
I
my
know,
God.
I know. You got me.
Okay, nothing is better than Hogue saying, I didn't do
done.
that, following it by doing it.
I'm
My
done.
goodness. Love it, Hogue. Anyway, are any other corrections you'd like to make and then immediately make the same mistake? Or is that just
we
the
are
only
in
one?
mid-season form right now. Just doing great.
Talking
about
virtually
when you have
anything.
when you're out of college for those 2 months in the summer and you go back in September and you're like, wow, am I the stupidest person that has ever walked this earth? I just cannot think. I kind of feel like that with baseball right now a little bit. My brain's not there yet.
Let's get back into the baseball and the actual roster and on-field product. So there were a couple of interesting articles about Matt Wallner, basically saying that last year he had done a lot of off-season lifting and he just got too big. And so his swing got a little bit funky because of how much he had lifted. And, they always say earlier, before we had a lot more statistical analysis than we have now, that big league hitters really didn't want to get that big because they didn't want to bind themselves up. You need to be able to stay flexible to swing. And so it's interesting that Wallner sort of took it upon himself to be like, oh, I'm really going to add some muscle here. Your goal is not to be the strongest version of yourself, or at least not sacrificing flexibility for strength when you really need to be able to harness all of the momentum that your body can offer at the plate.
Yeah, I agree. It is kind of weird, but I think it hits those young guys sometimes because they're like, okay, I just want to be in the best shape that I can be. I want to be as strong as I can be, because how much that muscle falls off as the regular season goes on. So I understand kind of where he's coming from. But yeah, that makes total sense. When you bulk up too much and you don't have that fluid of a swing, that can be a real problem.
Speaking of Wallner, there's a lot of conversation about how Wallner has bat leadoff a ton this spring, and Rocco's been asked about it, and he seems to think that this is a very good option against right-handed pitchers, that Matt Wallner could be your leadoff hitter for your Twins. What do you think about this?
I mean, it sounds dumb if you would have said it 10 years ago, but the guy gets on base. So I'm fine with a guy batting leadoff who gets on base, even though he doesn't fit the prototypical mold, but he gets hit by pitches all the time. He's a good hitter, so he's a guy that you want to have getting more at bats. I'm okay with it. It's goofy, but I'm okay with it.
It is a bit goofy. I mean, I do think that leadoff homers from Matt Wallner could be a very consistent trend, which would be pretty cool. When I was reading the articles about this, I was very curious about our prediction show, and I'm curious because I was looking at the stats from last year and all the players that we've added, or the players who we haven't added, I guess I should say, to determine who's going to hit the most home runs this season. And I think Matt Wallner is likely going to be a pick for some of us, and I just wonder, will leading off, do you think, lead to less homers if he's going to be less prone to take those big swings if he's looking for pitches?
I don't think he will be. I don't know. I think they're probably having him do this so that he doesn't change his approach at all. But that's kind of a funny thing that you mentioned, because he could very realistically be someone a lot of us pick for on-base percentage too to lead the Twins, which is kind of wild. And that's fine. Put that guy at leadoff then. And again, I don't think it's going to be something that happens all the time. So I get Rocco having him do it a lot right now, because there's other guys who will bat leadoff this year who have done it before. So throw him in there in spring training. If it makes him alter his swing too much or his approach, then don't do it. But now's the time to try.
Yeah, it'll be fun to see. And I do think that Matt Wallner could be one of those mainstays for this Twins team that lost the greatest right fielder to ever play the game in Max Kepler.
That's never going to leave you, is it? That's just going to hurt for so long.
Oh, when I see him playing against us, Hogs, it's going to be heartbreaking.
Do we play the Phillies at home this year?
No, unfortunately, we don't see them at home. They're actually the last series of the season in Philadelphia.
You might have to, that might be your trip of the year, David. Go out to Philadelphia.
See the Liberty Bell, eat a cheesesteak. I could do that. It'd be fun. So speaking of this roster construction, though, Hogs, a name that keeps popping up in all of the articles from Gleeman at The Athletic and from the guys over at the Star Trib is that Mickey Gasper, guy picked up from the Red Sox, is sort of making a name for himself in spring training, and he has some positional flexibility. He can catch, he can play first base, he can play second base, which is probably the most intriguing part of what he brings to the table. Do you think Gasper could steal that last roster spot over a Jose Miranda or a Austin Martin or a Eddie Julian?
Well, Jose Miranda is going to be one of the top 5 hitters in baseball either this year or next year, so I don't think that's actually going to happen, but I don't know. I think that's a lot of smoke and mirrors for spring training. I don't see him beating out any of those guys. Do you?
I don't know. I don't really know. I think part of this is because I don't understand who's going to play second base for this team, because, Hogs, I've watched basically every spring training game that you can watch that the Twins have had televised, and every single time I see Eddie Julian play second base, I'm just like, I don't know that I see this. The constant double clutches to throw to first are a problem. He needs to figure out how to get rid of the ball faster. And secondly, if you're going to play him at first, fine, because at least it limits the amount of times that he has to throw the ball himself. But I think at first base, Ty France is going to be your guy there. I think his numbers have been fantastic in the spring. Like you said, it is spring training, but I just think that Eddie Julien, if he can turn his bat around, great, but he still needs to figure it out in the field to be valuable to this team.
I do think he is the biggest question mark of those guys that are going in. Like, I think he probably has the shortest leash, but doesn't it seem like how, like we were talking about before, that the way they talk about him, that he's on the team, like you just get that sense.
Oh, Canada.
It certainly seems like nobody's questioning the idea that Eddie Julien is going to be on this team and playing second base. So Gleeman just had an article actually about this second base question, and he's like, okay, well, we have Eddie Julien, and we have Willie Castro, and we have Mickey Gasper, and we have Brooks Lee. Like, we have a lot of options at second base, but Hogs, if I said this player is going to start 140 games at second base for the Twins, which of those guys do you want to play second base?
Brooks Lee, without even a question. Like, that would excite me a ton, because that means Correa is playing shortstop and Lewis is playing third. And
hang on. You took that question within the context of the team as a whole, and I guess look at it just at second base in a vacuum, not injuries set aside. Do you see?
No,
what
but
I'm
that means that also means Lee is producing too. Like, I think the question goes hand in hand with both of those, though, because if those guys are healthy, Lee is their number one option to play at second base, and if he's producing, I think he's who they want to be out there. Like, I don't know. I get way more potential from him than I do from Julien right now, because Lee just kind of fell off at the end of the year, but he's still producing contact, and his defense is phenomenal. So if we're going defensively, it's not even a question.
Yeah, I do see a lot of options here where Julien may start because his bat is hot, but maybe he gets replaced early on for Brooks Lee, who's a switch hitter, obviously, but also is just, as you've said, infinitely better in the field to begin with.
I think we're going to see a good step forward from Lee this year. Like, if I had to pick a guy between all of those that who's going to step up from where they were last year, I think Brooks Lee would be my, as of right now, first choice.
See, I just don't know that I'm ready to give up on Eddie quite yet, because I just think that
last year was miserable. Like, I cannot watch that guy watch any more strikes. Like, it was horrible.
I know. I'm not saying that he's in tip-top form and he hadn't had his struggles last season, but what I am saying is that he has shown flashes, Hogs, to be a guy who's going to be constantly on base, and if he can get back to that and he's not watching these strikes, middle down the center, and for
he has
strike
power
three,
too. I think that's one thing that he has on Lee for sure that Lee just does not have yet, is that power.
Yeah, and a worse haircut, certainly.
That's true.
I couldn't even tell you what Lee's haircut is. I just know that it's definitely better than whatever Eddie Julien.
It truly cannot be.
So I don't know. That second base is going to be interesting. I am honestly so curious what happens at second base, and it would be nice. I guess it's hard not to be jealous of some of these teams that go into the season knowing this is what your third baseman is, and this is what your shortstop is, and this is what your second baseman is, and it feels like a privilege sometimes, not a right as a Twins fan, to just understand that we don't really know who plays where. I mean, we have guys who can do it, but we don't really have the guy who can do it. So we have Correa and Buxton and Lewis, and then all the other positions are sort of we have people who can do that, certainly.
Yeah, which I think they need to figure that out sooner rather than later this year, because I think guys do become better when that is their primary position.
Except for Willie Castro.
No, I was going to say, especially when you have that limestone wall out in right field that you have to figure out.
And the limestone in left field that can come into play only if the ball bounces in play and then bounces off the limestone wall and then comes back into the field of play. The famous Eddie Rosario ground rules.
Was unbelievable.
It's the only confusing thing about target field ground rules for the most part.
That is true.
Everybody understands how home runs work, but that limestone in left field, not the limestone in right field, that's what throws people off.
That is a problem.
As I just mentioned, the three guys who we know what position they're playing, and I guess that's maybe not even the case when it comes to Royce Lewis. Who knows? That guy might be playing second. He's another option at second base and just another guy. Hogs.
Well, no, it's true though, because his arm got a little scary at third base at the end of the year last year.
Yes.
So,
and do you remember when Polanco was playing shortstop and he sort of messed around with the more underhand throw as opposed to the overhand throw?
Yeah.
And now you got Correa who bounces the ball sometimes just to make it more
Correa's
difficult.
bounce. That's awesome. Because it works so well. He just drills it into the ground. It's like a way that he can get. I cannot get over how much I love that.
Okay, but I'm just worried that Royce Lewis needs to figure that out. And if he's next to Correa, he should be able to pick up some pointers on how to make sure he's hitting his target and not. I mean, the overthrows were getting a little bit silly, honestly. honestly.
I get the feeling that he's a guy who needs to, we all love him because he's emotional, right? Like that's one of the fun things about him, that he's pretty honest. But I think he has to dial that in for a 162 game season and not get too, like I think his fielding can be dependent on how he's hitting. And I think that's something that he'll do better at the more he matures. Because you think about it, he's still, and this is your point, but he hasn't played that much baseball in the last 5 years because he's been hurt for half of it. So I think that maturity will come. But yeah, it's definitely a concern right now.
He is the one.
Let's hope he is the one, Hogs. But so this is my question, though, about this. We know that Correa is at shortstop. We know that Buxton's in center when he's healthy, and we know that Royce is at third when he's healthy. But I have a hard time picturing what that looks like, Hogs, because we saw it so little last season of those three guys being in the lineup, and it's truly like a mental block when thinking about this team. Can you imagine what it looks like to go the first 3 months of the season and these three guys are all on the roster and they've all played more games than they haven't?
No, it's wild. That would be absolutely incredible. I would be so happy if that were the case. But you're right. It seems like we're not allowed to have that. Like there's some rule that says the three of them can only play together 11 games and then that's it.
Should we feel that way? Like I know that history is like what
because
we're like,
they're hurt all the time. Like we have, that is earned. That is so earned.
It's hard to imagine. And like I remember we're watching that game at Target Field and Royce comes up lame at third base and we're just like, are you kidding me?
Yeah,
like
and those three, they're so great and they're so like electric on the field too. I mean, we talk about this more than we talk about anything else when they're healthy. And yeah, it just feels like out of those big three, because we talked about that too last year, like which one of the big three is the most important? Well, the big three never play together. So that is a good question to ask. And man, if we could have them all play, even if they all played 115 games, I mean, if I told you that right now, wouldn't you take that in a heartbeat?
No question. I signed on the dotted line. I'll sell whatever I need. Probably not my children, but maybe.
And that's missing 47 games or whatever. I mean, that's just bizarre. But yeah, it's crazy.
So we'll move on to the one note that you've added to the spreadsheet, Hogs, that just says Lopez stinks now? Question mark?
Okay, so I'd like to just throw this out here because you said he should be in the Hall of Fame right now. So I just want to see.
That's not what I said at all, Hogs. This was a hypothetical question about what Twins player currently on the roster could make the Hall of Fame, and I made the case that Pablo Lopez could be the dark horse because he's shown that he can have some longevity and he can have a lot of starts under his belt and be successful. Don't say that I said he's a Hall of Fame candidate right now, Hogs. My goodness.
This is your Hall of Fame candidate's spring training stats currently. 9.35 ERA with a 2.54 whip. Now, the sample size and everything is like not, we don't have to talk about that, but are you concerned?
No. 2 seconds ago, you were talking about how Mickey Gasper's numbers can't be looked at because it's spring training, so it's all smoke and mirrors. But you can look at Pablo Lopez's spring training numbers and being like, he's terrible. Yeah. We should move him to the bullpen now. How does that work? You can't have it both ways, Hogs.
I can have my cake and eat it too.
No, that's the exact opposite of the statement, Hogs. That's not how this works at all.
I don't even like cake. Like, it's gross.
I am...
Ogres are like onions.
It's not what we're talking about, Hogs. But so, no, I'm not really worried about Pablo Lopez. He's a professional. He's consistent. I think that he's going to be great this season. Obviously not as great as my guy, Bailey Ober, but I think he's going to be very successful this season. And I do think that there's a lot of reason to be super optimistic about a Twins rotation that we haven't had of this caliber for, I don't know, a decade.
And yeah, and I am joking. He's thrown 8.2 innings, so that is just what it is. But if it were a younger guy, I think maybe you're a little bit more concerned with how they come out. But they're in there to get warmed up and ramp up. They don't worry about any of that coming in. And I think that's a good point with the rotation. If Lopez and Ryan and Ober don't feel like they have to go 7 innings every single time they're out there because the bullpen is shoddy, and Zebby and Festa and SWR are only throwing 4 innings every time they're out there because they're young, the depth that we have this year is going to help those star guys way more because they're not going to feel as much pressure, and they can go out and have a 6 innings pitched or a 5 innings pitched and be okay with that because we know that the rest of our starters are hopefully going deeper in the games as well. So I do like that point that you made.
Yeah, I'm very excited to watch this team pitch, and obviously, hitting is always behind pitching as the season progresses. So if they have a dynamite March, April, that's great. But I'm curious what happens when we get to June, July. Does this rotation have the stamina and the skill level to continue performing well as as the season progresses, not just in those opening stages when they're playing in 55-degree weather at Target Field.
But that's the nice thing too, though, because we have the depth. Like we have those guys that whoever makes it between Zebi and Festa and SWR, who's filling that out, there's going to be a guy in AAA that's willing to come up and take that spot. And I like that instead of like, oh, all the AAA guys are here and it's April.
So the Athletic each year, they offer a sort of survey that you can fill out about how optimistic you are about your baseball team heading into the 2025 season. Hogs, the Twins currently rank number 21 as far as the Hopometer is concerned on the Athletic webpage. Do you think that's too high, too low, or just right?
I think I'd maybe go like, it's like what Dan said, where that sounds like it's too low, but then you start looking at the teams that are above them and you're like, maybe that's about right. Like I could maybe argue 15 or something like that, maybe if I'm really feeling optimistic, but I think that is about right. The Twins didn't do much. We're relying on a lot of young guys that had really bad sophomore years to have good years in big positions. But our pitching looks good, and we haven't been able to say that in a while. So I don't know. I think it sounds about right.
I think that obviously the way things have gone with the Pohlads and the way that this whole sale, not sale thing has come to fruition, I think that for sure impacting fans' viewpoint. And every year I get this way, where I start to get more and more optimistic as the season starts, where I'm just like, okay, this could be the year, if guys take a step forward, it's going to be great. And you're less concerned about like the off-field stuff with the Pohlads. You just sort of assume that no moves are going to be made. I think there's sort of this cautious optimism that if the Pohlads do manage to sell this team, the boost that it could give to, I think the players know it. The players know it, right? Like, I know that they talk about how much they love the Twins organization and like the way that they treat their players and things. But at the same time, that Carlos Correa saw the offseason moves this team made and was like, what now? That's what you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. But that's why we need some more, like, I don't know, it needs to be solidified, but it's not going to be anytime soon.
We'll see. You never know, Hoax. There could be a mysterious billionaire waiting in the wings for
Mr.
opening
Target.
day. Mr. Target, yes, Mr. Target. So speaking of the way that the Twins treat their players and their families, Baldelli set up a petting zoo at spring training, and so the players could come with their families and pet the different animals. And this is, I don't know why I love this quote so much. I couldn't find the audio because this would definitely be a sounder on this show. But Baldelli said, I'm a llama guy. I love me some llamas and alpacas. Man, I would love to have a working llama alpaca situation someday. Maybe not soon, but someday. They're great. I've never been a pet guy, right? We never had really cats or dogs or anything. Well, you had a dog, Ranger.
I did have a dog, but now that I have kids, it's like, why add something more that I have to take care of?
One of my favorite Scrubs lines is when Carla and Turk are talking about having kids, and Carla says to Turk, it's like, well, having a kid is just like having a dog that slowly learns how to talk.
Yeah. Sure.
But I just think that like Baldelli being so obsessed with llamas, that is not something like he seems like a very vanilla guy. And so there's got to be some things about him that like would hit you different. This is not one that I would have saw coming, Hoax.
No. I can't say that I've run into too many people who just outwardly are like, yeah, I'm a llama guy. That's what I like.
Okay, so quick side note, story on llamas here. So at the state fair, Hoax, you're familiar.
I am familiar. I hate it more than anything, but yes, I am familiar.
I love it. I'm a big state fair fan. Well, so they have all of the animal areas, right? And there's a llama barn, and then there's like the show llama area where they can like show llamas. Hoax, I wasn't familiar with a llama procedure or protocol as far as watching llamas is concerned. And I was
Did you
with
get
some
spit
buddies. No, worse, Hoax. Much worse. I walked into this llama barn where they're showing llamas, and I had a beverage or two. I wasn't like intoxicated, but like I was having a nice day.
Yeah.
And I walk into this llama barn, and I just scream at the top of my lungs, woohoo, llamas! Just very loudly. And Hoax, again, we had just walked in, so did not understand what was happening. Yeah. It was dead silent in there. There are signs that say not to make loud noises to frighten the llamas. And I had everybody in the stands just staring daggers at me. My buddy, who was with me, dying laughing, ran out of the barn, keeled over. He's laughing so hard. My face was the reddest it's ever been in my entire life. I've put my foot in my mouth many a times on this show and otherwise. That one, if I could choose one to take back, that's in my top 5, I think.
That's pretty good. You ruined some girl who had trained her llama
that's what
all
I'm saying.
year.
I felt so, and I just walked out, right? Like, what am I going to do? I can't yell, I'm sorry. I think that makes it worse, right?
Nothing can make it better. The damage is done. You just need to leave.
Oh, man. Okay. I figure we've talked about football. Why not llama shows
why not llamas?
also here? Well, let's move into some news from around the league. This is making the rounds on Twitter and all of the sports websites here, Hogs. The new era MLB hats have been released. I thought this was pretend. I did not think this was real. So what they've done, folks, if you haven't seen this, you have to look up the pictures of these hats. They just took the team name, like in the team lettering, however they have it, and then they took the team logo and they just put it right on top of whatever the team name or the state name or whatever they use for their typical
just
lettering.
didn't think about it at all. No one looked at it again after that.
And, okay, here's what I'm convinced happened, Hoax. So I think they're in the design room, and like you have someone who's looking at the screen, right? And they have both of the primary logos for the team up. So like for the Twins, you'd have like the Twins, just TWINS, and then the TC, right?
Yeah.
And they were looking at those, and they were like copying and pasting. I don't know how much you've worked with like graphic art stuff, right? Like you
and they
copy
just got
and paste.
one on top of the other. Like, oh, that looks
that's
cool.
I think they hit Control V one too many times, and it just got pasted on top of one of them. And they're like, well, why don't we just put both the logos on the hats? We don't need anything new. We'll just use the existing logos, and we'll just print them both. And it looks, for some of these, I do not understand it, Host. Like, the only thing I can think is it's one of those, like, any publicity is good publicity type things. And
that's what I thought, too, is, like, maybe they did it because, like, everyone's going to hear about it in a day. And to be fair, everyone has, but...
Do you think they'll sell? Like, that's what I really want to know. Do you think it becomes a
they
selling
already
point?
Pulled the A's and the Rangers off the shelves, and they are not selling those anymore. But there's still some bad ones. Like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what if you put an A in the middle of Angels is going to spell. I mean, there's just it's not good. It's not good.
No. And I look forward to buying a new hat every year. It's one of my traditions here. I buy a new hat from the Twins every single season. Normally, it's oftentimes the spring training hat, but as I've mentioned, I hate.
Yeah, that one's not great.
Oh my goodness, they're like, let's put a giant Florida patch on the side of this. It's like, no.
There's another one that New Era has out there right now that is like a mountain range for the Twins, and I'm like, you know that we don't have mountains here, right? Like they're just. I get like the snow theme and everything, but. There's no mountains.
Yeah, I mean, geography is not my strong suit, Hoax, but one thing I know, not a lot of mountains here in Minnesota. Anyway, so if you haven't seen those folks, make sure to find them and take a look because they look ridiculous. There's some sad news. We don't like it when players get injured. Let's say that. Okay, we do not like it when players get injured. We want everybody to be successful. However, the Yankees' Gerrit Cole is likely to miss the season with Tommy John surgery. Giancarlo Stanton is likely to start the season on the IL for a good length of time. This Yankees team, Hogs, it's the Juan Soto curse, I think. They missed out on Juan Soto, and now here we go. All the other guys are falling like flies.
I was not devastated by this news. How about I just leave it at that?
Well, I think, and part of it is I don't really care for Gerrit Cole because of when the whole spider attack and the spin rate stuff came out. And he's like he gave the worst possible answer by not denying, but also not confirming. And he's like, well, guys use stuff sometimes. Like, and it's like, that's not it's not a
by
good
all
answer.
Accounts, he is a gigantic jerk. So, I'm never rooting for a guy to get hurt, but
how can you like Josh Donaldson then? I don't understand how you like Josh Donaldson.
Because that's a jerk in a different way. Like, I don't mind like jerks on the field, if that makes sense. I like a guy who plays with fire.
You think Josh Donaldson was not a jerk off the field?
No, I'm sure he was. But like the most of the stories that you're talking about, like the cleaning off the plate or kicking dirt on the plate, like that to me is a lot more funny than a guy like outright lying / like white lying whether or not he cheated or not and justifying it with like Gerrit Cole. I've never ever liked Gerrit Cole. And Donaldson, I agree. Like, you know what? Donaldson is a hard one for me to defend now, but the home plate stuff was funny. That stuff is funny to me.
Funny, sad, depending on your perspective. But anyway, moving on here to Yankees West, the Dodgers have extended Dave Roberts 4 years, $32 million, setting the highest annual average ever for MLB managers. Hogs, here's my question. How much better do you think Dave Roberts manages that club than almost anybody on the planet?
They don't need, I mean, who cares though? Like, the $8 million to them is nothing. So just do it. Like, why not?
Well, I realize, but what I don't understand, Hogs, is that, like, what are you getting exactly? Like,
Yeah,
what does he
I
need to
agree
know?
with that.
Like,
I
the
totally agree with that. But
If there's no injuries, or if there's very few injuries, the lineup card is already made for
it is set.
Like,
It is set for
there's
you.
not a lot of wiggle room. Like, Rocco sits there with his beautiful mind spreadsheet that he has all, figuring out who's going to hit where and, like, when he's going to use the pinch hitter in the third inning and whatnot. And, like, Dave Roberts is like, well, yeah, we'll just kind of leave things as they are for eternity.
Yeah, right. I don't know. It's weird. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but why not? Who cares? They have so much money.
Other news here, your guy, Shohei Ohtani, money, Japan is advertising all over the place that Ohtani's going to have a Fortnite skin. I don't know that you've seen this. I'm not really a video game guy, but like a skin is like an outfit or like a costume. What's the name? I don't even know. I guess
It's just like it's the whole character. It's like the avatar.
Yeah, okay, yeah, Avatar. That's what I'm looking for. But like his is like he's a baseball player, or you can put him in samurai gear, and then his like sword is like a bat, which I think just feels funny to me. But it's pretty cool, I guess. I mean, if you could be made into a video game character, I think you've made it in whatever field you're in.
Well, yeah, and I mean that I think it's just another point of like how far Shohei's draw is going. Like, and I think that's great for the game of baseball ultimately that he is in all of this stuff. I'm not a gamer either. I played Fortnite a few times, but I definitely won't be playing anytime in the near future. But I just think I love it. I love seeing more of those baseball guys out there. And he's such a funny guy to market too, because it just doesn't seem like he has much charisma at all. Like on the baseball field, yes. But everywhere else, the guy just likes to be as private as possible, which mad respect for that. But it's just a little bit funny that like baseball's biggest guy is just so out of the news almost when he's not on the baseball field.
Yeah, I mean, there haven't been any stories about him in the past couple of seasons.
I knew when I said that you were going to bring that up. That's not what I meant, though. It's not like his, like...
Yes, he's a private person outside of the betting scandal. He's a very private person outside of that, Hogs. Well, Hogs, we have talked about a lot of things here, not just Twins. It's a little bit of a bonus episode, I suppose. We covered the Vikings. You name it, we talked about it here. But
Timberwolves are looking good, too.
Yeah, so we'll
we have to get them in there.
We'll have another show after probably the next round of cuts, but then the clock is ticking here, Hogs. We got the first F1 race on the calendar is happening on Sunday. Very exciting.
Drive to Survive is out now.
Oh, man, Twins baseball is just a couple of weeks away, Hogs. Can you go ahead and send us out?
Yes, sir. Well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win and find our Min for the Win Facebook and Instagram pages. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform so that you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or a like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. Link in the description. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins.
That'll wrap up another episode of Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.